Good afternoon to those of you who have just joined us. If our presenters are comfortable going ahead, we can begin. You're gonna give me a thumbs up, thumbs down. Okay, excellent. So good afternoon, everyone. So this is Symposium number 12, Developing Foundational Programming and Maker Skills to Foster Creative Confidence. So this session will be an hour and 15 minutes. And my name is Hillary. I will be the chair for this session. So if you have any questions or technical issues throughout, please feel free to reach out to me through the Zoom chat and I will be happy to help you out. So just some reminders, this session is being recorded. So if you're not comfortable being on camera, please feel free to turn your camera off. And you can also rename yourself if you prefer to remain anonymous. I have also enabled the closed captions, and if you find those distracting, you can feel free to turn them off by clicking on more at the bottom of your screen, and there's an option to toggle them on or off at any point in time. So since we're starting a little bit late, I will go ahead and pass off to our presenters now so that we'll have some time at the end for questions.
Thank you, Hillary. I'm going to share my screen, and Nathalie, if you would like to start with the introduction.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for joining us on this Thursday afternoon, right at the end of the day. We really appreciate that you're here with us. My name is Nathalie Duponsel. I'm a PhD candidate in educational technology at Concordia University. And I'm the student of Anne-Louise Davidson. Unfortunately, she cannot make it today due to a family emergency. So we all wish her well. Houda and I will try to fill her shoes and present her presentation with, which I'm sure is going to be a bit of a Mickey Mouse version compared to what she would give you. But we've been working with her since for a long time. So hopefully we'll be able to still give you a pretty good summary of what she had intended on saying. So the session today, basically, we're going to be sharing with you some of our research and our experience facilitating making activities and experiences, and specifically aiming to develop creative confidence. We've noticed that a lot of the activities and the workshops that we give, people engage in them, they develop some skills, but then we tend to not see them engage in their own making activity or in their own project. So they come to workshops, but then we don't see them coming back to makerspaces for their own projects. And a lot of it, we believe, is related to creative confidence. They're confident when they're in a good structure, when they're surrounded by people who can help them if they get stuck, but they don't have that confidence if they're working alone on a project of their own. So today's talks are going to be basically touching on that subject in various ways and in various contexts, and to describe basically what we've noticed through our research, what helps people to develop this creative confidence, what may hinder it, and possible future directions. So most of you who are here are probably quite familiar with the maker movement, which is basically a do-it-yourself movement that is relatively recent, probably within the last 20 years or so, that incorporates old and new technologies like 3D printers and CNCs and laser cutters and such to create things to either solve everyday problems or just for the sake of creating something new. So the maker movement is quite a popular thing. Organizations like Make and Make magazine made the maker movement quite popular and well known. And now it's being adopted more and more by education, formal education environments like schools and universities, informal education environments like museums and libraries, and non-formal education environments like community centers. And so maker education is, if you want to go to the next slide, Houda, is being adopted for various reasons, primarily because of the 21st century skills that it's been credited to foster in learners. And these skills can include skills, working with advanced technology, like 3D printers or CNCs and things like that, but they also include the interpersonal skills and the intrapersonal skills, like communicating and collaborating and problem solving and that kind of thing. So making is being adopted by more and more schools. Schools and universities are opening makerspaces, so are libraries and museums, and for good reason. And again, our focus tends to be not so much on those skills. You can get the more technical skills in a university course, but what we're really interested in is those difficult skills to foster, like problem solving and collaboration, interpersonal skills, and you know, learning to deal with failure and learning from failure and that kind of thing. So I can move to the next slide. Thank you. So as we were saying, this creative confidence has become one of our primary foci as we look into making and getting people to push their limits and push their boundaries. We know with kids tend to be very creative. You know, when they're coming into school, I'm a school teacher by training. When they come into school, they're creative, they're not afraid. I mean, nobody has confidence like a 4 or 5-year-old. Nobody. They know what they're doing. They will draw something and tell you exactly what they're doing, and they have that confidence. And unfortunately, school and society and the way we work just tends to stifle that in kids. Even the way things work, for instance, like the way our technologies are, Nintendo or PlayStations, they're all made so that you cannot alter them, to the point on the next slide, where even just the screws and the bolts that they're using, the average person can't open because they're specialized configurations. So we don't have the screwdrivers or tools to be able to open them and repair them or modify them to our own purposes. So our society basically is teaching us that we have to accept things as they're given to us. And our message is no, we don't. For instance, what is a machine? Well, machines are human made. And if a human made it, a human decided what it does. And it also means that another human can decide it's going to do something different. And that's the mentality, that's the idea that we really want people to develop. This idea that they can make things for themselves and that they can alter things for themselves, and they don't have to just consume and rely on what companies are giving us, essentially. Next slide, please. So I think, Houda, you wanted to mention something about this experience in particular?
This experience, well, what this experience, and I'll show you in the following slides, but basically this is an open computer. And when you take this notion to a child or a teenager and tell them, like, what is a machine? And then you realize that machines were built by humans and this was made by humans. And then you open the machine in front of them and you get them to explore those different components and take them apart and put them back together. It insists that creative confidence in them, that just like someone else made this, I can also make it and I can modify it and I can, change things within it to make it do whatever I want it to do. So even if you go into old video games, all of those, they were given to children as tools of consumption. But then when you get to open them with the kids, when you allow participants and people to open those machines, to open those tools and just play around with them, to explore them, and give them that confidence that they can actually do something with them. So yeah, similarly, there to open the case, explore it, see how it's working, see what it intends to make, and then try to make something similar to it, which leads us to pushing the limits until we get to the arcade table. Nathalie, if you'd like to continue.
Sure. So, I mean, this is one of our first experiences, and what we've actually done this arcade table now with a few different groups, because it's a really fantastic introduction to the idea that we're trying to promote. And that is, we've taken this old flat screen monitor. We find most of them at thrift stores that have been abandoned. Nobody wants to use them anymore. We take an IKEA table, just a plain old IKEA table. We dig out its innards. We take the monitor out of its encasing, and then we use a Raspberry Pi and an emulation system software to put video games onto the Raspberry Pi. And we basically create this little arcade table. And it's a really wonderful example of how we have now taken a bunch of different old and new technologies, and we're combining them together to create something new and something that's our own. Thank you. It can also have some practical purposes, making. So it's, you know, yes, there's entertainment and you know, creating something for our own purposes, but there are also practical reasons for making. For instance, reducing waste. This is an example of an old lamp that Anne-Louise had. I believe the bulb had blown and she wasn't able to replace it because they were no longer made. And so what she did was she just took out the old lighting system and replaced it with LEDs. And now she's using this lamp and it works perfectly well. So instead of this lamp landing up in a rubbish dump, it's still sitting on her desk and working perfectly well. So making and this mentality of creating for ourselves and repairing, it has not only, you know, enjoyable aspects, but it also has some very practical aspects that are related to sustainability as well. Next slide. So after all of these experiences, Anne-Louise Davidson got involved in making in, I believe it was around 2014, and she's always been a pretty prolific maker. She's always been very involved ever since she was a kid. And so she wanted to research this, and we wanted to share our experiences with other people and get more people at the university and in the general public making. And so she initiated the Education Makers, which is a group of makers together. That's okay. It's a group of makers together, and we have initiated various projects in various locations at the university, at community centers, at museums and areas like that to try and promote making in formal and informal educational settings. And so we started with some events to try and demystify making and get people interested in making. And one of our first major events was the Montreal Maker Faire that we held at Concordia. And it was a tremendous success. I mean, we had over 80 exhibitors, 1,000 attendees. And it took over 2 days. And it was a wonderful success because we had a really great combination of people doing advanced stuff with robotics, you know, that most people look at and think, oh, I can't do that, to other people who were making handmade dolls and you know, didn't use any digital technologies. And it was a wonderful coming together of art and technology and creativity of people. And it got a lot of people introduced to making at the university and in the local environment in Montreal. Next slide. So more or less at the same time, Anne-Louise was in the process of starting up 2 makerspaces. One of the makerspaces was is now called Millio Make, which is a makerspace at the Millio Institute of Art, Culture, and Technology. And it's at the downtown campus of Concordia University. And essentially the goal of Millio is to get the disciplines to mix. To get art and technology and all these various disciplines to really mix and come together. And this makerspace is essentially a commons room where people can come and collaborate with each other and make with each other and share ideas. And the second makerspace that she co-founded was with La Maison des Jeunes, which I'm going to talk about later on, which is a community youth center in a difficult neighborhood. And the idea there was to get kids who don't usually have an opportunity for STEM experiences and for making to have that opportunity and to identify with it and see that this kind of activity can apply to them too, and they can be a part of it too. And to get them, these are the ones who are really told by society, you're nothing, you're going to do nothing. And these are really the youth that need to hear that, oh, yes, you can, and we're going to show you. So we began the small makerspace as well. Thanks. So in doing so, in trying all of these various things, we realized that there were some basic skills that people needed to have in order to engage with making. We can't, there's an idea that I'm going to talk about later on called the hacker myth. And this was basically described by Blickstein and Worsley, and they were stating that, you know, there's this idea that if you just provide people with a makerspace, they're going to spontaneously start making. Not necessarily true. We found that people do need the basic skills and the basic understanding of how things work to be able to start engaging with making. And they do need some other things, like, for instance, learning to go beyond the fear of making mistakes or breaking something or things like that. So we started with some maker fundamental workshops. Maybe we can move on to the next one. Yeah, so we started with some maker fundamental workshops, and what we did then is we had some events that you put to use or put to action the skills that the people developed in the maker fundamental workshops. And for example, one of them was an accessibility gamepad challenge. And the challenge here was these people had developed some basic circuitry skills. And we had an older gentleman that we were in touch with who loved gaming, but he had developed Parkinson's. And so he couldn't use the conventional game pads because the buttons were too small, and with his tremors, he would just trigger the buttons too easily. So the challenge basically was for these people who had learned basic circuitry was, okay, how can we develop a gamepad that a person with Parkinson's can play with? And it was a wonderful experience. It was a wonderful day. People were trying all kinds of things, and we were using basic materials like makeys and aluminum foil and that kind of thing. And it was a wonderful experience, and it gave the people a little bit of confidence because they had the basic skills that we gave them, and then they were able to apply it to a worthy, authentic cause. And they really engaged with it. And we started to see people coming up with ideas, and they were sharing ideas with us after the event, which was something that we hadn't been seeing so much before. Next slide. Of course, we continued. What we also like to do is we like to share what we're doing with the public, and we try to reach a larger scale. This one went globally with Arduino Day. So every year, Arduino, which is a microcontroller, for those who don't know, quite a popular one because it's open source. So people can modify it and do quite a lot with it. So we have Arduino Day, for instance, where we share the various projects that we've been able to do with Arduino, from very simple. As I said, I'm an elementary school teacher, so with the students that I work with, just use Arduino to light up lights and make things buzz. But so I shared that to show the simplicity. And then of course we had some engineers who were showing like really complex things, but to give people an idea of what is possible and what can be done. And that's another part of these fundamental workshops, is to help people understand what is possible and what can be done. And just so that they have a general idea, because a lot of the times people don't have much experience and they don't know what can be done, and they don't know what can be challenging. So those are important. And then we started to develop workshops that were a little more advanced. So we started with the maker fundamentals, but then we recognized that this it gave people the courage to start trying things on their own, but it wasn't quite enough to get them working independently. They still needed quite a bit of assistance. So we started the workshops for higher qualified personnel. So basically just more advanced workshops. And during these workshops and during these experiences, we also now started to identify the different components of the various activities that we were doing, so that we could more deliberately start to integrate them into workshops and into our activities that we were doing with people. Now, I believe, Houda, that you were a little more involved with the naming and the equation looking things here. I'm not sure if you wanted to describe a little more.
With the thought of pushing the boundaries beyond the basic fundamentals, we were also trying to combine concepts. So for example, when we did the access exchange challenge or the gamepad challenge, it was more about combining two concepts of gaming and access, and how can you provide different access to the typical gamepad or the gaming for individuals. So within the challenge, we had groups of people who came together, and we divide them into different groups, and each one of them co-created their own gamepad and what their gamepad for them would look like that would allow different types of access. Another concept, so this is a video, and it's showing Nathalie and another participant, and they were playing by touching each other's hands, if I recall correctly, right, Nathalie?
Yes, so that was a fun one because with a society, and this is kind of ironic given COVID-19, but this was before COVID-19. The idea was that especially people with disabilities, there's so little contact. People just don't interact with them like they do with the typical person, and especially with touch. And basically with that little device there, the people themselves become the buttons for the game. So you have to go and touch different people to get the game to do different things. So it was the person, in other words, the person with the disability becomes the source of what makes the game work. So they're the conduit. So they're serving a very powerful purpose in that context.
Another equation is M plus A, which is music plus access, and what that was something for me personally was very interesting, because we were talking about collaborative instruments, and here we went beyond exploring the typical concepts of music to see what does music, how do different people interpret music, and what does access to music mean to different people. So in that sense also we experimented with music through lights, music through vibrations, and how can we co-create a collaborative instrument where two people can play one type of instrument together. I don't know if this will also be a video. So in this video, all three of them were playing this one instrument that was, so they were all playing this one instrument, which is basically a plastic, a PVC tube with microphones installed in it at different points. And Charles here was playing around with the code in the background and changing it to change the tune of what the microphones were picking up as they were playing. And they started to go into that vibe of playing music and changing the tone and changing the beat that they were adding to that PVC pipe. Another thing that we had was working with soft robotics. So creating molds to do silicone molds using Lego. So we created those molds using Lego blocks, and then we added the silicone, waited for it to dry, and we created those chambers that allowed us to have soft robotics.
Oh my god!
Another one is the Mycelium, and this one maybe Nathalie, you can explain more about it.
Yeah, so I'll actually describe it a little more because I will be presenting it, talking a little bit about it in my presentation. So we can skip over this one just because I want to be conscious of time.
Okay. And this one also, it will be on my presentation talking about the fabric of Millio Make and weaving makers skills that go beyond the basic fundamental skills. But this is a preview of it. There's a video as well. And that takes us back to the maker fundamentals that we started with. So the idea is that those maker fundamentals are essential, but having them in silos, you know, just learning how to do prototyping, it doesn't serve its purpose on its own. So just having those maker fundamental workshops on their own without combining different concepts, without combining different technologies, without combining different fundamentals as well, it doesn't allow participants to push beyond the basics and really unleash all the creative confidence that we would like them to foster, that really meet the needs of the 21st century skills.
Exactly.
So back to you now.
Yeah, so all of this is really, really complex, as you can see. So Anne-Louise was appointed a Concordia University research chair in maker culture to study all of this. It was becoming evident that this is quite a big field and quite a lot to study. And so she's really working on this. And there are many future directions that she has started pushing on in the last couple of years, some of which were triggered by COVID, because making is inherently a very physical thing, and a lot of making takes place in maker spaces. But with COVID and not being able to access these spaces, it changes the dynamics of making quite a lot. So she's been exploring some of these avenues and how do we do this at a distance if we need to. So if we go to the next slide, I think we'll skip this one for now, Houda. It was a fun little one. You can ask us about it afterwards. So for instance, she is initiated, can we go to the next slide? I think it's the Innovation Lab. Oh, this is another fun one. We're doing Kombucha. Again, a project we can talk about afterwards. But she's initiated 2 major projects, and one of them is the slide before, sorry, there we go. She's initiated one of the major projects that we're doing is we're looking at the facilitation approaches in different contexts. What you do in a school, in elementary school, versus what you do in a higher education context versus what you do in a museum. It's going to be very different because you're working with different clientele with different constraints. So what we're doing with this study is we're interviewing facilitators from various different contexts to see their approaches that they're taking, to see what is common among them and what differs and why they differ. The next project that she's working on as well, on the next slide, this is just a wonderful example of Anne-Louise trying to outreach to children, for instance. She wrote a children's book called Amber the Maker, about Amber, a young girl who's an amputee, and she gets frustrated because her prosthetic device isn't working properly. And at first she gives up, but then her imaginary friend, the dragon, says to her, no, why don't you make a prosthetic that works better for you? And again, it's this creative confidence that the story is promoting, that you don't need to just accept what's given to you. You can change it and you can make it for yourself. And it's a wonderful book, and I invite you to contact Anne-Louise about it. And there is a way to view it online, I believe, but she's getting it translated into multiple different languages now. It's been recognized by the United Nations, and it's being promoted by them for the Sustainability Development Goals, particularly number 4, which is education. So it's a wonderful endeavor. And the next one on the next slide is the Innovation Lab. And she's initiated the Innovation Lab at Concordia University with one of the vice provosts, Nadia Boyan, yeah, who spoke yesterday. And at this Innovation Lab, basically they've been doing it virtually for now because of COVID, but they will eventually have an on-campus location for it. They're challenging students to come up with new ideas. So if we go to the next slide, or the slide after, these are challenges that have already been done. For instance, the challenges are for the students to come up with innovative solutions to current problems. And one example that I'll give you is a mask challenge. So with COVID, there were a lot of problems with masks. There were problems with masks leaking. There were problems with discomfort around the ears and the face and all of this and that. And so what she did with a group of students is she said, okay, each group pick a problem, pick a challenge, an issue with the masks, and improve it. And the solutions they came up with, the ideas they came up with were fantastic. I helped out with that. I was part of a similar project, and the things that the students came up with were amazing. And even for those who weren't able to come up with a working prototype at the end, they said that the learning experience was amazing because not only did they develop some skills, but they developed that creative confidence that she was talking about, that she's been trying to promote. And they really feel that now they can become a part of the solution to some of these major problems, rather than standing on the side and just accepting what's given to them. So I hope we've done a decent job of presenting this to you. I'm sure Anne-Louise probably had some other aspects of it that she wanted to mention, but from working with her, these are basically the major lessons that we've gained from her. And there should be some very, very interesting future directions coming with this.
So, should we move on to the next presentation? I'll just share my screen again. And so to continue the conversation about what we were talking, I am going to continue talking about the fabric of Millio Make that we briefly mentioned in the other presentation. But first, just a quick introduction. So my name is Houda again, and I'm a nurse originally. Then I studied instructional design, and I'm a maker, and I'm one of Anne-Louise's students. Sorry about that. So today I'll be talking about weaving maker skills that meet the demands of the 21st century. And originally I started my journey at Millio Make now almost 2 years ago by attending different workshops, including basic electronics, 3D modeling, Arduino programming, and robotics. You know, all those workshops that we were talking about in terms of the maker fundamentals. In one of the pictures for 3D printing, me and another student, Rima, we basically built the 3D printer that we later on did all of our prototypes and learned 3D modeling through. And it was that process that got us to understand how a 3D printer works and what to assume and to troubleshoot it later on as we are doing different kinds of prints. So through these workshops, I acquired basic maker skills, which were the building blocks that led me to the project Fabric of Millio Make. The project Fabric of Millio Make was inspired by the work of Joyce Wieland, merging her exploration of various materials in her artwork and her attempt to reclaim needlework as an art that requires high levels of skills and inventiveness, which opposes the traditional devalued perception of quilting being women's domestic work or craft work. Fabric of Millio Make takes on the metaphor of a quilt that tells the story of the community involved in making it. It combines various materials, including knitted yarn, 3D printed fabric, embedded electronics and sensors, and each piece presents a different approach to making, thus contributing to the overall fabric of the maker culture as experienced at our makerspace Millio Make. When starting on this project, I started by planning the basic ideas of what each piece within the project would look like and what it would incorporate, and then I went on to prototype each one. So as you can see, I started off with just a piece of paper and writing on it the different concepts that might be included within each piece and how they would integrate together, and then doing rough prototypes. And today I'll be talking about one of the most challenging of them all, which is, and it's also the most fun, of course, which is the electroknitting piece. It's a fully knitted breadboard with NeoPixels soldered on it and connected to a microcontroller that is called the Gemma MO. And the NeoPixels, as you can see in the video, and I'll show you in a minute with a live demonstration, those NeoPixels are reacting to sounds that are being picked up by a microphone. So the idea of a knitted breadboard basically began as I was, sorry, I'll just start the video. But the idea of a knitted breadboard began as I was trying to understand how a breadboard works. And to be honest with you, the first thing that I tried to understand when taking the basic electronics workshop, and the first thing that stopped me for a while, like I took all the basic electronics concepts in physics in school, but just seeing the breadboard, for some reason, I stopped on it for a few minutes trying to figure out how is this thing working? How are the connections happening? So that idea gave me also the idea after I understood how it works. The way the rows are connected made me think of it as a knitting pattern. And from there, I started drafting knitting patterns and circuit diagrams and prototyping them. So in exploring that, I wanted to use different types of material to simulate the conductivity of within the breadboard. So I used the copper yarn, and I used cotton yarn to do the plastic rows basically within a breadboard. And then afterwards, I soldered 29 neopixels onto the piece and connected them to each other through their data lines. And I used conductive thread to connect the data lines together, each neopixel on its own. I used plastic beads, first of all, to insulate the conductive thread that was going through the neopixels, and it also added an aesthetic feature to the piece. Until I also added the Gemma MO and the microphone. This was also at an earlier stage when I was still working on the piece. And now I'll just stop the slideshow. And I'll tilt my screen to show you the piece itself. So as you can see here, this is a piece, and basically, as I'm talking, the microphone is picking up my sound, and it's translating the analog signal being picked up into a digital signal that lights up the sound, the neopixels. And the higher the sound, the more LEDs light up, the more neopixels light up. And basically going through the iterative process of developing responsive embedded wearables allowed me to merge different concepts, different technologies, different fundamentals, basically going from the basic electronics to the programming and the Arduino programming, including basic skills as well related to knitting. And all of those allowed me also to explore collaboration and creativity and push boundaries that probably in any other discipline it doesn't allow you to do that, all of which are needed for to meet the needs of the 21st century skills. So thank you very much, and I believe it's back to Joel.
Okay, so it's to me. I guess I'll introduce myself since Anne-Louise isn't here too. And I'll just share my screen quickly to start. Can everybody see my slides? Okay, let me go full screen. Okay, so my name's Joetrudeau, and I'm really happy to be here, to have been invited by Anne-Louise and her team to be part of this symposium. There's so many interesting projects that have been presented, so much potential for innovation in education. I guess I will take a bit more of a narrow version or a narrow slice of this wonderful area of maker education and maker culture and maker possibilities, and look at, I guess, the formal challenges. So how do we implement these kinds of approaches to learning in formal education, in particular in the college setting? So I'll talk a little bit about a STEM pilot at Dawson called Makerspace, and give a few examples of some of the things that students are doing, and some of the developments of our within curriculum and in co-curricular activities, and maybe a few thoughts and reflections about where we go from here. I share many of the same concerns as Anne-Louise and her students. We've been working together for a little bit and collaborating on some things, including having mentored a little bit in the Innovation Lab and sort of working on the maker fundamentals for education dimension of things. So I teach in the physics department at Dawson. I'm here today also with my colleague and close collaborator, Jawhar, who just happens to be Houda's brother, which is very cool. And we've been working on a few things together. So I wanted to loop Tawfiq into this presentation at some point. He'll share some perspectives on some of the things he's been doing with students. But I'm a founder and one of the coordinators of an initiative called SPACE at Dawson, which is an acronym for Sciences Participating with Arts and Culture and Education. And it's now in its 13th year at Dawson. And it offers enriched learning and mentorship opportunities for students. And as a learning community at Dawson, the general aim of SPACE, one could say, is to empower students to integrate and apply skills and knowledge beyond the classroom and across the disciplines in order so that they can develop deeper understanding, direct their own learning with passion, and share that learning with others. That has been our main sort of goals for a number of years. And this is supported by various venues and annual activities. So the mixture of STEM and STEAM and maker education principles in particular are helping to shape and guide what we're doing with students, particularly now and for the future. And the Makerspace project is the first phase of a multi-stage initiative, and it's grounded in the best practices and principles of the maker movement and of active learning pedagogies, providing unique interdisciplinary learning and teaching opportunities supported by the creation of what we think will be next generation STEAM curriculum, as well as access to a makerspace, a newly developed makerspace that localize the activities of the associated learning community. To see what sorts of innovations in teaching and learning opportunities may be possible, I'd like to actually take a brief look at some of the understandings and definitions of what is a makerspace. So these were really instantiated by a lot of the projects that were just presented by Nathalie and Houda, but I'd like to just look at, how people see what is the definition of a makerspace, and you can see within these different kinds of definitions what's possible. Of course, you could take an engineering perspective on this, but there are so many different ways of thinking about what makerspaces are and what they do. So a makerspace is a metaphor for a unique learning environment that encourages tinkering, play, and open-ended exploration for all. It's not only a place where you can make stuff, but many times it's a place where you make meaning, which many times is more important than the actual stuff you make. So that focus on process and on community and those that you're collaborating with in this environment. It's a space with materials for students to let their curiosity and imagination come to life. It's an informal, playful atmosphere for learning to unfold, a space where making rather than consuming is the focus, a space where one could say transdisciplinary learning, inquiry, risk-taking, thinking, crafting, tinkering, and wondering can blossom. I like it as a collision of art, technology, learning, and collaboration. It's a little bit more well-defined, and that's in one sense how I really think of a makerspace and how it's used. It's a place where people gather and make. They come in all shapes and sizes. A makerspace is primarily, though, and for the purposes of what we want to do in education in say the college environment, it's a student-centered learning environment with limitless possibilities. So it's not necessarily born out of a specific set of materials or spaces, but rather a mindset of community partnership, collaboration, creation. And within that, we'd like to be able to embed teaching and learning experiences that will align with the curriculum, but also provide opportunities for students to go beyond that. So the possibilities for innovation in teaching and learning across the arts, sciences, and social sciences in higher ed is being better understood and appreciated, and the use of maker education for that. Importantly, as we've been hearing already, opportunities also for inclusion of students of diverse backgrounds and skill sets can be leveraged to instill confidence and to deepen learning in all who participate in maker activities. So I'd like to just present a work in progress, just very briefly. So with funds in part from an Entente Canada-Quebec grant at Dawson, we have created a new makerspace for the science program. It's actually a converted closet. It used to be a storage closet for the physics department. And we're already starting to prototype activities in there. But COVID has delayed, let's say, our daily use and the practical use of this space and how we might integrate it into program activities. But one of our goals is to connect with other sites of making at the college across programs to create unique opportunities for interdisciplinary projects. Every program has a, let's say, a site of making, a lab, a workshop, and also an approach to making. So what we'd like to do is foster a community of practice across the college that incorporates maker fundamentals and maker education principles. Additionally, we've been piloting learning activities for courses as well as independent projects. So for example, we've been developing a curriculum for blended learning activities through the Makerspace project, and used to teach engineering robotics, where one of our goals there is to aid in the development of competencies in students for success in the fourth industrial revolution. We've been using, and you've heard about it already, we've been using the open source Arduino platform for this, for exploring with rigor and imagination ways that can be adapted to just about any level of education or background. And Arduino-based curriculum is being integrated at Dawson and will continue to be among the technologies that we feature in projects, especially in our new makerspace, which is exciting. I'm just highlighting here one of the projects that we've done over the years and that we're relaunching. You can see the scale of it here. It's a 5 foot by 10 foot light box called Transluminal. Let's see if I can switch out. Everybody see that? So underneath that, there's Houda's LEDs, except quite a few more, and with some other interesting hardware and software and ingenuity on a team. You know, you can turn that into a primitive screen. And so this original, or a low resolution screen, let's say. And so the original project was part of an art making activity that explored the concept of going beyond the speed of light and looking at it from a creative perspective as well as a technical perspective. So what does this physical limit actually imply? And so we explored that in both creative and rigorous ways. And with over 200 members of the community, we put this project together. The outer layer, as it's shown in this image, is a series of individual tiles painted by members of the community during an art making workshop, where they explored the notion of what it means to go beyond the speed of light. One of the nice interpretations that I really like about this, you can think of being able to transcend your own limits when you work with others, and you sort of break beyond the speed of light in that sense. So this gives just a very, very thumbnail sketch of some of the things that we're working on, but I'd like to focus on the Arduino stuff here because it's of interest for what we're currently doing with COVID and what we feel will be new and interesting ways we can work in maker fundamentals into the curriculum. So of all the super interesting things I have the privilege of working on at Dawson, it's the student-driven, student-initiated, student-passion projects that are my favorite. They're fun, they're inspiring, oftentimes surprising, challenging, and outside of the class, they have no formal grade attached to them. But so much is learned, and I feel I always learn. This is what I often say: I always learn more from students than they do from me or the other mentors, because they're driving this. And so we're finding ways that we can take this approach into the classroom as well as outside the classroom. And Tawfiq will also elaborate on some of his experiences working with our students on projects and in co-developing curriculum that can be used in and out of the classroom to, let's say, provide unique and powerful learning experiences. And we're going to talk a little bit about the engineering robotics stuff that we've been doing and studying, researching, we presented on, and we'll have a poster on tomorrow morning if you want to learn more about that. But first, let's look at a couple of quick examples to give you a sense of what we're doing in this small corner, let's say, of making using the Arduino platform. So one of our student projects by Kaylee Bates that she's also doing in a complementary course, in and out of the course. She's doing this both for credit and not for credit, is the automated garden. And the automated garden right now is a work in progress that's making a lot of progress, actually. And it's an eco-conscious project that to encourage home and community gardening. So it's an automated Arduino controlled gardening system that will take care of your plants for you until they're ready to be transplanted. And the ambition is to be able to monitor plant vitals such as soil moisture, temperature, humidity, soil, sunlight exposure, and respond to needs based on the plant type. This project is supported by Space, but it's really driven by Kaylee, and she's learning everything about the individual hardware components that you need to make this work. And one of our ambitions is to be able to put together all the instructions so that anybody who wanted to set this up at home would be just follow her instructions or modify them or innovate on top of them and be able to set up their own automated garden at home. But the overarching goal for her is really, you know, a contemporary issue or a social impact dimension. She wants to encourage urban agriculture. Right? So it's a pretty neat project. And as another example, we also do annual learning activities with students. And just here's an example of the Hackathon Heat Rover is a winning solution to virtual robotics mini coding challenge given at the 2020 McGill Physics Hackathon. It was a learning activity. We took a number of Dawson students to attend, and for many of them it was their first experience programming and just loads of fun. And so getting them exposed to these kinds of activities where they're not being assessed, where they can sort of fail and experiment and collaborate with one another and get mentorship, it often is eye-opening for them. And what's really important is to follow up with them after. So now that you've had the door open for you, how do we take you through it and into the next phase of your learning? The virtual environment here represented a uniform 2D plate of unknown dimensions at some fixed time with a heat source. And the hackers at this hackathon were asked to use an ultrasonic sensor and temperature sensor to make a heat map of this plate using a simulated Arduino robot as a rover. And Hristo's team, called Task Failed Successfully, won this mini coding challenge. But the technology used here, actually developed by Taufik, and him and I put together this challenge, is what we're also using in the engineering robotics stuff that we're doing. And our larger goal, let's say, is to be able to help teachers, trainers, and students with the learning of skills needed to thrive in the fourth industrial revolution. Taufik, if you're here, would you like to share a little bit of your experience of some of the projects you've been helping to mentor, and maybe you know, some of the work we've been doing co-developing curriculum?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
hello,
great.
everyone. So I joined Dawson College maybe 2 years ago, where I started working with Joel on some of the space projects and the hackathons. And before that, I didn't really have any experience with kids outside, like teaching an engineering curriculum, because I'm coming from an engineering like bachelor's degree at Concordia, and I taught some tutorials, but I never done it with the kids that really have no reason to be there just because they want to. So with the space initiative and with the hackathons at Dawson College, we had students who really just wanted to explore and have fun and learn, which was really amazing to support and help, because you give them something, you give them help, they actually go and take it, and they, like, sometimes we're really surprised how far they go with it. They come up with solutions that even we, in some cases, wouldn't expect or think about. And this experience has been amazing so far. With the robotics, like, we have two divisions at Dawson. One is outside the classroom, as we were saying, with the space initiative, but we also have been taking it to the classroom with the engineering physics, one of the labs in engineering physics. And it started as a robotics, learning how to program with Arduino. And then during the pandemic also, we had to find a way to continue the labs. So we started developing a virtual lab where we didn't want to compromise on the actual learning experience and the actual robotics fun experience. So we did a bit compromise on going from a real world to a two-dimensional world, but the experience from the students, what we observed is that it was really fun, and we had a lot of feedback from the students saying that this was the best lab they've had during the pandemic, that did not switch completely everything, and gave them the real experience of what the lab is, or somehow the real experience. And after the lab, we've been contacted by many of the students that have been buying kits and trying to build the robots themselves at home, which also shows how just introducing students to Arduino, or this new world that is based on the open source technologies that is making it accessible to everyone. Like, just all you have to do is introduce it to them, and they have enough resources online to start taking it further by themselves. And this experience really has been great so far.
Thanks, Tawfiq. That's amazing. And so this just gives sort of a one flavor of what we're thinking about in terms of what is possible in the framework of making. And if you're interested in learning more about what we're doing with the engineering robotics labs, what we did this semester, where each of the students were able to take kits home and design their own navigation courses in addition to working on the virtual lab platforms, we invite you to our poster session tomorrow morning. But just to stay zoomed out for a little bit, one of the major goals is looking at the possibilities of STEAM, right? Integrating the arts and the sciences. And interdisciplinary education frameworks such as STEAM, sciences, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, I think it's getting to be pretty well known now, as well as science, technology, and society that aim to integrate the arts and sciences are being developed as approaches to help students thrive as our society enters the fourth industrial revolution. And so this era will be marked by the impact of AI, biotechnology, genomics, climate change, and so many other complex global problems, open-ended problems, wicked problems. And in preparing the next generation for the challenges and opportunities that these developments pose, it has been widely recognized that reinforcing the connections between disciplines will have an indispensable role to play in that. So, but specifically integrating the arts and sciences in post-secondary education in some unified or unique, consistent way, it's been a persistent challenge, let's say. And so makerspaces provide an ideal learning environment to flexibly explore this educational challenge to innovate in and out of the curriculum. And as part of our pilot initiatives at Dawson, the Space Initiative, we'll launch a new program independent arts and sciences certificate in fall 2021. And it's not a certificate like you would normally think of certification. It's more like a minor. So Dawson has a very specific idea about what certificate is, but it's independent of all programs, so all students can participate in principle. And students will complete the certificate through individualized pathways and be given the opportunity to participate in workshops, research collaborations, excursions, hackathons, and other learning activities. Participants in the certificate will also have the opportunity to share their work through articles, podcasts, and other media formats on the Space website, as well as through talks, conferences, exhibitions, and annual public programming. And to support their explorations, students will have access to mentorship and specialized learning environments such as makerspaces, and as well as through virtual platforms and at regular space meetings. And so it's through a broad holistic learning experience that integrates the sciences with arts, humanities, social sciences, that this approach and what we hope to do with the certificate will prepare students with that intellectual flexibility and adaptability to navigate our rapidly evolving world. So if you want to know more about what we're doing, feel free to reach out. I'd love to love to speak and collaborate with many folks. I hope I haven't gone too much over time here, so I'm going to stop share and quickly pass it back to you, Nathalie. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Joel. In the interest of time, what I was going to present was just a more specific example of what we've been doing with Anne-Louise, but we only have about 8 minutes left, and I think it would be really interesting to take any questions from the audience or have any discussions that people would like to discuss. Did we have any questions? Right now I can only see myself and Joel. Is there a way we could see everyone?
Yep, so if you just switch your screen to grid view, Nathalie, you should be able to see everyone.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. That's much better. Not that I don't like your face, Joel. It's just, I'd like to be able to see everybody.
So people can
Thanks, Nathalie.
ask your questions through the, oh, sorry, you can ask your questions through the chat, or you can raise your hand to ask as well.
Anita has a question.
I was going to wait till after to ask, but I guess if nobody else is going to ask, then I'm very curious to know the duration or the intended complexity, I guess, of the curriculum that you're planning for the certificate in arts and science. Like,
Yeah.
would it be a year, 2 years? Because, yeah.
Yeah, so that's one of the challenges, right? When you're designing, co-designing with students, a learning pathway through their programs that sort of flavors or adds different learning experiences to something that is really highly structured, semester by semester. There are advantages and disadvantages. One of the advantages is that you can focus on attributes that you want them to acquire. And so the certificates at Dawson are formulated around this idea of knowledge, application, and agency. So each certificate kind of has a version of that. And so the way we've designed it is that there's a foundational knowledge component. And so that would be arts and sciences integration writ large. And it's housed primarily in a complementary course, a multidisciplinary complementary course that's open to all students. But we also have a paired course version of this that is an English and humanities pairing called Story Values, where students will be able to explore that in a different way. And a third way is we're looking at using workshops. So they would be asynchronous workshops that the students could go through to get these sort of the foundational knowledge, and then they would have to follow up with a project. And so that project would be coordinated by one of the space faculty members or some other collaborator. In addition to that, we'll be running like live workshops, right? So the students can do these asynchronously as well as get foundational knowledge in that way. And then at the end of the experience, they do something like a capstone. So every program has a version of an integrating activity. So you can link it with a capstone project that might occur in a program, or a student can propose one independent of that. And so we have a flexible framework for students to be able to do this. In between that, there's cross-listed courses that will integrate arts and sciences themes that students can take to get credit. There's a number of co-curricular activities that we run. And so what we're minimally asking them to do is about 15 to 20 hours of co-curricular activities and at least one cross-listed course. And there's a number of them that they can choose from. So it's a very flexible way for students to do this and to choose according to their interests, right? So if you want like an arts and sciences integration, you can do that. If you want a science heavy arts and sciences integration, you can do that. If you want sort of very broad, you can do that. So we're designing it with flexibility, but one of the challenges there is coherence. What does this amount to in the end in terms of like a consistent exit profile from a certificate? Well, the certificate itself is thought to be as a minor, so it's an addition to their program. And what we're really excited about is this ability to collaborate with the students on helping them develop their own learning pathways and for them to be able to get credit for that. We've been doing this informally for a number of years and the students seem to love it.
Can I ask one more follow-up to that? What do you find is the motivation for students usually to sign up for such a thing?
It varies. I think often students are looking for things to do, especially those students who are, let's say, self-motivated. One of the challenges is to get those students who wouldn't otherwise do an extracurricular or a co-curricular or be intrinsically motivated to go beyond the classroom already. And that's, I think, what the certificate is going to enable. There's a little bit more structure to get them in, but often it's them seeing what their peers have done. And sort of once they become part of this this community, they kind of get it and they have fun with it. And so learning does not have, when it's for its own sake and you're sharing knowledge and you're giving the support that you need to, let's say, learn something highly specific as well. And without the pressure of assessment hanging over that, students tend to really enjoy that. That's just a slice. And then
Congratulations to you and Dawson. It's great.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to get a good view of what it would mean. Now, suppose I take a student who does a deck in science and a certificate in space. Now, are you saying that basically there would be this students would take option courses or complementary courses and perhaps extracurricular to do that certificate, or is it going to be mainly extracurricular? I'm trying to get a good vision of what it means for the student.
Yeah, and then I'll share the full document. The deans have been a little bit slow on finalizing, in particular the name. It's already gone through the process of approval, and we're putting all of our cross-listed courses together. But I'm going to share with you the full document. You can see that what we've thought about is there's going to be sort of 4 typical pathways that a student will go. One is really oriented towards the curriculum, like it'll be more of an academic pathway. And at the other end of that, it will be really highly weighted towards co-curriculars. Now, we want students to take at least one cross-listed course. So that's going to be our main constraint. And if it turns out that they combine what they learned within their program into an independent project that they propose and still do it as an extracurricular, that will be sufficient. So there's enough flexibility in how the students can co-design these pathways that they can go straight through in an academic path or straight through in a co-curricular, extracurricular path. I'd love to also talk to you about maybe cross-listing neuroscience.
Yeah, I was thinking of that,
yeah.
But I mean, it fits a lot of your criteria, but arts could be there or not. So
the onus would be on the student.
Yeah, I was thinking that in that case we could. Yeah, I was. That was also on my mind. If I have, well, it's 5 o'clock, so I think I'll ask you questions at the time. But yeah, I mean, we'll have to talk also about, you know, how we got our first run of doing that in the classroom, and at some point we should share our thoughts on that. Okay, thank you.
Wonderful, thanks, Helen.
Yeah, so it is 5 o'clock, and just a reminder to everyone that there is now a social hour taking place on GatherTown, so you can get to that link on the Grenadine platform. I can still remain on this Zoom for another minute or two. I don't want to cut off your conversation, but just a big thanks again to our speakers. That was a really interesting and creative session, and it was very cool to see the creativity. And thank you to our attendees as well.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Hillary, for being a great chair.
Yeah.
Take care of us.
Thank you for the presentations.
You're most welcome.